So our topic for today, and by the way, there may be a few others joining us as we go along, but let's go ahead and get started. It's called the heart of healthcare, and it's a term that we developed over the past couple of years, really. That was intended to try to capture sort of a unique quality that we maybe need to reinvigorate ourselves, remembering what healthcare really is about. And this particular topic that we're going to talk about today is on mentoring. It's about looking at a way to use our values to promote learning. So we call it values-based learning. That's a particular type of learning strategy. We're going to go into a little more detail about what that means as we go on this morning. But I hope what this will do is kind of give you a kind of a broad picture of what I'm talking about by mentoring. Number one, I'm assuming you are all participating today because you have an interest in that or have had some experience with that. But I'm hoping to actually challenge you and stimulate you to go even deeper into that as you go on in your ministries or your teaching careers or whatever you're doing, that it will be a way, it'll somehow support and encourage you in that. Really hoping that will be the case today. So let me talk a little bit about really what is the Heart of Healthcare mentoring all about. First of all, it's based on a concept that's been developed really, it's 10 years ago now. It's a model called dialogue learning, developed by Jane Villa. She's in Oregon and had considerable experience in disappointments training in Africa. And this dialogue learning model kind of came out of those disappointments in some ways, and it was tested then by her subsequently, and then found that to be quite effective in terms of communication and skill building, cognitive development, and critical thinking were key targets of this dialogue learning model. And I'm using the idea of mentoring to kind of build on that, to add a personal engagement piece to this dialogue learning model, so that we're not just communicating information, but we're actually communicating values as we're communicating information. So there's content to the information that's beyond just the facts, is another way to say that. That's one of the key things that this Heart of Healthcare initiative is all about, and what I hope will come across to you today. So because of that, it tends to, what we will do is I'll point out to you ways that we focus on why and how we do what we do, not just what we do and want to do, but why and how we do it. One of the fun things that we discuss as we kind of work through this material in the course that follows this over the next 7 weeks, or not next 7 weeks, but there's a course that follows this. In that course, as we work on developing specific skills at learning how to plan for certain things that we want to have happen, as opposed to just hoping that we do. How are we going to do it, and why should we do that? Those are the two key focus aspects of this. It uses teaching techniques that optimize learning potential, not just knowledge. I was talking to a group of ophthalmologists, as it happens, a few weeks ago, and what was interesting in that group is that they were used to sort of a Western training model. And that Western training model, which I would bet most of you have had some exposure to, really focuses on dispensing information as efficiently as possible. So, the lectures, the large group lectures, the PowerPoint presentations, oftentimes with too much information on the screen, as you all know. We all try to avoid that, but there you go. And the things that are done are really more focused on dispensing information. And the problem with that is there's a difference between information output and information input. What you take in and what is given to you are two completely different things. So I discussed with them, how is it in a situation that they were in, these ophthalmologists that I was speaking to a few weeks ago, how could they optimize the efficiency of their model of training so that what went in, was efficiently received by those that they were intending to reach? How could they optimize that? They didn't have a lot of time, is the bottom line. They were trying to do this in addition to their practices, their other obligations. And so it was helpful to them to find ways that they could optimize learning potential, not just dispense knowledge. Fifthly, it facilitates development of critical thinking skills and judgment. There's a big difference between knowing a fact and knowing how to use that fact. Uh, this Heart of Healthcare initiative and this mentoring that goes with it is intended to stimulate people not just to know certain facts, but to stimulate them in how to use those facts and develop the judgment skills that they need to be able to utilize those facts effectively and for the benefit of their patients, in most cases, is what it would be aimed at. Promotes discovery of redemptive pathways, I call them, for creative problem solving. So most of you, maybe all of you, work in situations or have worked in situations where there is significant challenges to overcome. You know, there are significant barriers to success. And that could be really trying for you as an instructor because you know it's like you're talking to someone about making a terrific meal with shrimp and scallops, only to find out that there's never been any sighting of shrimp and scallops in that area, for the past 100 years. So it's just you can talk about it all you want to, but it isn't going to accomplish a thing. So how do you overcome these barriers? Well, finding ways that you can redeem existing pathways and redeem those redemptive pathways for creative problem solving is a key part to what you as a mentor can actually participate in. These are some of the things that I think make this enjoyable. It's the personal engagement aspect. It's the optimization of learning. It's seeing students that are actually learning, not just hearing information, but there are specific skills you can develop that you know how to engage and know that they are actually learning. So active feedback loops. For example, you know that someone is learning by the way they feedback things to you. That's part of this mentoring skill that we're going to be talking about. Developing the critical thinking skills means there's a maturity or a wisdom that you start to see as a mentor in your mentees, those that you're working with. Not that they didn't just get smarter, that's a good thing, learn more information, but you start to see that they actually know how to apply that in different situations. There's nothing more fun to me than seeing someone do that. They take away so much from this. So how does learning work? Let's start kind of at a fundamental level and think about why does this even make sense to approach it this way? Well, the fact is that we're designed to learn. I believe that that's part of our created design. We're constantly learning as a result. As you all know, the problem is sometimes we're learning things that are not terribly useful. Sometimes we're learning things that are useful to someone but not to you. And sometimes you're learning things that are useful. A lot of times it's just something you're interested in. So you're constantly learning. But we learn what we want to learn because it's important to us. This is a critical factor in this whole mentoring, dialogue, learning strategy, is that learning is driven by desire to learn. And information can be shared all day, but you may have been to meetings. In fact, you may be today, go away from this meeting and you'll take maybe one thing away from today. I hope you take away more than that. But the fact is, the reality is, I'm very honest and just honest with you about it. I realize I'm doing a lot of talking, and there's going to be some things that maybe catch your ear or your heart or challenge you in some way. That's what you're actually going to hang on to. And maybe you'll go back and look at slides or whatever, and that's great, or listen to a recording. But in the end, what you're going to take away is what you wanted to learn today. And I'm very aware of that. And so it's humbling for us as mentors, as instructors, to realize that's actually what's going on out there in our audience. But it's also realistic, I think, because that's how we're designed. So the other thing that's interesting to me, and I love this part, is that in a mentoring relationship, you really can't predict or control exactly what a learner will learn. And the learner can't really predict that either. So it's kind of fascinating. If it's true that we learn what is important to us, it's driven by what's important to us, then that means we can't entirely predict. I don't know ahead of time, in other words, everything that's important to you. I'm hoping to find a few things that are important to you and to scratch that itch, as we would say. But I can't predict what that might be. And I've had it happen many times, and maybe you have too. One of your students would would say, you know what I really enjoyed about what you said today was this. And you think, is that what I said? You have this strange look on your face like, okay, well, that's great. I didn't really realize that was what I was talking about, but that's great. It's a very good point. I'm glad you picked that up. So it's sort of unpredictable in that way. It also means that the benefit of learning usually goes beyond what is predicted from the content that's presented. In other words, the information is greater, the knowledge or the wisdom that comes from the information is greater than the sum of the parts, is another way to say that. What you learn is oftentimes, because you process it with lots of other stuff you already know, experiences, feelings that you have about these things. It's fascinating to me in our design, the way God has designed us, that all plays into this little bit I'm saying to you right now. And it could mean that you come away from today with something that's really well beyond what I was even hoping would happen from today. That's entirely possible. And I've seen that happen many times. It makes it great fun. And it also, it's another one of those humbling things. You realize that, you may have it all planned out, what you want your students to get out of it, only to find that something even better occurred. And not because you designed it that way, but because there was something going on in that situation, their experiences and so on, that made it more valuable in a way that you could never have predicted. So learning is a thinking process. It's not a memorizing process. Very important to keep that in your head as an instructor or as a mentor, that as people are processing information, they can store it, that's memorizing. But if they're processing it, if you are helping them process it, which is where the term dialogue learning came from, then that processing is actually where optimal learning occurs. It's when you're processing information that things become sticky, I call it. Information that you are sharing becomes sticky because it gets processed in a way that connects with something they're interested in, a specific need that they have, or some experience or thought from the past that just sort of jumps to their mind that you would never, you couldn't predict even that would happen. So this thinking process is where learning actually occurs. So it looks like this. This is another way that it's represented, and there's many of these sorts of ways of presenting this. But you can see at the top of this cone of learning, it's called, 10%. We tend to remember, after 2 weeks, we tend to remember 10% of what we read and 20% of what we hear. That's why I make no, I have no illusions that you will walk away from today and go, boy, that's going to stick with me forever. I'm hoping you'll remember at least 1 or 2 things. Really, I am. Because that's the way we're designed. It's not, I'm not saying I'm not a good presenter. I'm saying it's just the way we are. But if we stopped and had a discussion today and actually talked about it, 70% participating in a discussion, look down the pyramid there, or giving a talk, 70% of what we say in a discussion will stick. You will start remembering, and your participation will actually assist the learning process. Why is that? It's because that's the way you're neurologically wired. It's the way it happens. It can't happen any other way. That's the way it has to happen. That's the way God made us. 90% will stick if you actually get into doing and talking about it at the same time. So if you're simulating the real experience, which is both doing and talking, then that immersive sort of experience can have a profound effect on remembering what it is that you're trying to do. And again, all this is not so much dependent on the presenter and how polished the speaker they are or any of that. It's really more about the way we're wired to learn. And if you keep that in your head, you can use that to your advantage, is what the point of this, these learning to be a mentor is about. Learning the skills, the knowledge, the attitudes that help you get to that 90% mark in students actually walking away with things of value that they want and need to learn. So why are we talking about learning? One, it's to make sure it's clear in your mind that it's not the same as teaching. There are lots of people who are teachers. All mentors are teachers, but not all teachers are mentors, is one way to say it. Hopefully everyone here today is both a teacher and a learner, but to distinguish learning from teaching is critical for you to get involved in that process where information turns into learning. That transformation of information to learned behaviors, learned attitudes, learned judgment skills, that transformative process is different than just what comes out of your mouth or what I'm saying right now. So I want to make sure that's why we're talking about learning, is so you know that it's different from just teaching. It's the second reason we're talking about learning is that if you start to think about what learning actually is, it helps you optimize how you do your instruction, how you do your teaching. You start to see it not as an end in itself, but as a tool. That's really the right way to think of it, in my opinion. That you see teaching as a tool for learning, not as an end in itself. Doesn't Teaching itself doesn't really require engagement. So think of the traditional classroom, or even a question and answer classroom, which is kind of what we have here online right now. You can ask a question, but it's not really the same kind of engagement as if you're sitting over a cup of coffee or tea, having a cup of hot tea and discussing. I wonder what's the difference between learning and teaching. And we were sitting and talking about that question. Just imagine we're sitting together talking about that. What would the difference be? There'd be a significant difference in the level of engagement, and in the result would be a significant difference in the level of benefit in terms of learning itself. Teaching doesn't really require ongoing feedback. So think of the way we've all been tested. You get to the end of the class and maybe they give you a pop quiz, or you get to the end of the course and now you do the final examination. That has no benefit at all to the instructor, except over maybe a period of time, seeing that people consistently fail his class. He might ought to think again about how he's presenting the information, perhaps. But for that specific class, it doesn't really tell them very much. So that kind of feedback that is sort of at the end of a process is not nearly as helpful as that ongoing feedback, that progressive feedback that you get in a mentoring type of relationship. Lastly, it depends on personal engagement and proximate feedback, so that the learning process, we're wired to learn as a community. And that sounds kind of lofty, I guess, to say it that way, but think of how the whole way that we think about ourselves in a modern mindset is individualistically. We think of ourselves as little islands, little boats in the sea, and it's all about if I'm going to learn something, I'm going to have to do it. That's not how learning always has been. The way learning occurred was in villages, in tribal groups, and so on. Think of the nation of Israel, for goodness sakes. They learned as a nation. There wasn't such a thing as individuals, that were learning about individual things. They learned as a group, and that type of personal engagement in a community does something neurologically to us that stimulates the learning process. Part of it is that it creates this proximate feedback. Someone says, I don't agree with you about this or that, whatever point you just made, or I have a different perspective on this that I'd like to share when they're talking about some topic. That kind of proximate feedback has a way of triggering analysis and synthesis of information, not just absorption of facts. So it's far different in the rote learning models that most of developing nations seem to rely on. You go and you recite things. Large groups of children stand in the classroom. I remember I was in Pakistan at the UNICEF Learning Center in Balakot, and it was interesting to watch what was happening. They were doing a demonstration for me of how effective their learning was, and all the children stood up. The guy had actually a rod in his hand. It was about 6 feet long, and he raised the rod. They all stood up promptly. I'm imagining what would happen if they didn't with his long rod, and then he would use the rod and point at this board that was there, and they would all in unison recite this information. No discussion, no feedback whatsoever. And the problem that I've seen in my training of surgeons over the years, I've done quite a bit of that, is that that information never gets translated into good judgment and critical thinking skills. That's so important for effectiveness in life and patient care and so on. So that's the reason we're talking about learning, is because it's a unique process that we as human beings were designed for. And if you don't pay attention to that, then you're missing out on a real opportunity to affect someone's life. So why are we talking about mentoring then? Let me just shift gears here slightly and say, well, this personal engagement and feedback are key to learning, like we just said. And teaching itself is often impersonal. And so think of your very worst teacher and your very best teacher, and what is the difference between the two of them? You may have, I can think of my physics teacher when I was in the ninth grade in high school. Just loved this guy. And the reason is that he was thoughtful, and the way that he presented information wasn't just, here's what you need to know. He always presented it as, why did we need to know this? And in retrospect, I can see why that caught my imagination. It didn't just stimulate my memory to remember information. It stimulated my imagination. And as the best teachers are often the ones who stimulate your imagination. The worst teachers are the ones who show no evidence of respect for you. They show no evidence of real care about about your success as a student. Their job is just to get the information out there and they're finished. Those are the worst guys. And interestingly, every time I do one of these classes, everybody remembers their worst teacher first. They say, oh, I don't want to be like that guy. And that's exactly what I would hope for all of you too. And hopefully these things we're going to talk about will help you in not becoming your worst nightmare yourself, that you will go far above and beyond that. Mentoring, as we're using the word, is a set of interactions that gives the trainee controlled and appropriate access to you, not just your knowledge. And it's that element that changes the whole dynamic. By the way, it doesn't necessarily mean one-on-one training. Mentoring is not necessarily just one-on-one. Oftentimes we'll have groups of 3 or 4. And mentoring is more about your role in that small group and how that interaction works than it is about the size of the group necessarily. Now, granted, once you get to a large classroom, that's not a mentoring setting, of course, that's not. But even a small group of people, you can very effectively do a mentoring type strategy, because it's based on the type of interactions that you have, that gives the people that you are working with controlled and appropriate access to you yourself. It's a valuable tool for this values-based learning, because it adds the personal element to it, not just information. So I hope I'm not beating this horse quite too much, but I think it's so important that you see that you're encouraged by listening in today, that you see that what you bring to the table, the most valuable resource that each one of you brings to the table is actually you. Yes, you have skills and expertise. That's the reason that you have the opportunity. Those skills, knowledge, wisdom that you have gives you opportunity. That's all it does. The resource that you actually bring to the table is you yourself. Your skills, your knowledge, your attitudes, these things that you bring to the table, it's about what resides in you as an individual and what God has caused in you and developed in your own life. Your wisdom and hope in the end, I think, is what really inspires and motivates students. They can see your skills and be impressed. They can hear your knowledge and be intimidated. They can, appreciate your attitudes, but have no idea how to get there. But once they start to catch on to the hope that you have and the wisdom that you have, that can really change can take the tide altogether for those mentees. So to go back to our main topic today, this is an initiative than to help you inspire, build, and transform people. That's what the Heart of Healthcare Initiative is. And I like to think of it as the art of engagement in other lives. So perhaps some of you have been in a discipling sort of relationship with someone, or you yourself have been. I know I have been benefited from being discipled. It was called, the term that we used in the Christian community was we were discipled. That meant that you were in a mentoring relationship where you were actually engaged with another person who was interested in your success as an individual in life and was willing to build you up and see you become successful. That's the same idea here, an initiative to help you do just that. And so this graph, this picture, we could spend quite a bit of time on it, but it's just to kind of give you a snapshot of the idea here of what all we are engaged in when you're engaged in mentoring. In the end, it's about people. It's about building bridges that connects information to useful and meaningful needs that individuals have. And it's about transforming thought processes, the way that people think, not just what they think, but the way that they think. And in the end, I believe that that's really what gives us the transformative potential that is needed and so important to see. So just a couple of things to say about this. Mentoring, first of all, is what it's not. Mentoring is not a strategy for improving performance of underachievers. So not the way that I'm using it. So I understand, it's sort of a, what is the word for that? When a euphemism sometimes for the underachiever. Well, Johnny, you'll need to go in for your mentoring today. And what that means is, you've been a terrible performer and now you have to do penance for that by, sitting in the classroom with this mentor who's going to straighten you out on these things. So it can have a real negative connotation. Mentoring in our culture, sometimes it can have a very negative connotation. Sometimes it has a connotation of very specialized training. So the more specialized it is, the more of a mentoring type of thing it is. I hear that quite a bit also, not so much in this country, but in others, that mentoring is about delivering specialized knowledge or unique skill sets. And that's true. There's an aspect of mentoring that is just that. But that's not all it is my point. So mentoring is not just specialized training. It's really not personal counseling either. So I'm not trying to suggest that in the role of a mentor, really what you're doing is, you're providing some sort of counseling for problems that they're having as individuals and such as that. Again, there may be some of that you have the opportunity to address, but it's really about the opportunity that it gives you to engage with them about skills and knowledge and attitudes that they need to be successful in whatever the profession or the conditions are that you're working with them in. Another way that mentoring is thought of is that it's one-on-one teaching. I mentioned already that I really disagree that that's the definition of mentoring. It certainly can be one-on-one, and that can be quite effective. But I think in a lot of cases, especially if we are coming in as outsiders, like many of you perhaps do, maybe you go into a country where you're a stranger to that culture in some way, some distance to that culture. And by the way, this can be true even within our own countries. If you're working in a underprivileged or a community that has less access to resources, you're a completely different culture. Perhaps if you have plenty and they don't, that's a different culture. In Africa, when I've done quite a bit of my training work in Africa, I found it to be very useful actually to make sure that I always have at least two that I'm mentoring at a time, never just one. And the reason for that is that with two of them, they can be each other's mentor. They can actually engage better because they know each other's culture and I don't. So it gives them a chance to process something that I'm saying or something that I'm doing, and they can make it more relevant to their particular setting and their culture. So don't think of it, mentoring, as just a one-on-one teaching sort of experience. It's much more than that. Mentoring is a way of relating to a learner that focuses on engaging them as a person on a learning journey. And that's a long sentence, but let me just unpack that a little bit. So first of all, it's a way of relating. It's a role in which you are relating to another individual or individuals, that in which they are, moving forward in a process of learning. We already said that we are designed to learn. God has made us to be learners. That's we wouldn't survive as a human race if God didn't make us that way, but He did, and so we learn. We're designed for that. This idea of mentoring that I'm talking about today is an idea of relating to those who are aware or in need of that process, engaging them on this journey that they are on. A lot of times, even these days, you'll hear people say that, well, I'm on a journey, in their spiritual journey, for example, they'll say it that way. But there's also a learning journey, let me just suggest. And that learning journey can be extremely um, critical to identify what that journey is like for that person. It's a way of saying mentoring is a process, is a process or a way of relating to another person's learning journey. That's maybe an easier way to say it. It's a way of relating to another person's learning journey. Your learning journey and their learning journey sometimes merge temporarily, or maybe for short or longer times. That's what mentoring is. So as a result, it means you're actually growing with another learner. You yourself are growing as well, not just them, but you too. I always tell the people in my courses like this that I love these type of courses because I always come away with something better, something new, something clearer about these ideas, completely new ideas that happened just last week in the course that we just finished. That was like this one. Someone had suggested a way of doing a question, a sort of a formal questioning sort of method that I hadn't heard before. And just brilliant, simple, straightforward, and a great way to engage learners. So I always learn quite a bit. And the idea of mentoring is that you come to expect that. It's not just sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. It's that's actually part of the plan, that you are growing with them. Thirdly, mentoring is investing your time, energy, efforts, skills, knowledge, and wisdom in another individual using a process. And here's the part that I kind of don't like and do like, using a process that you can't fully control. So, this is not the picture of the 6-year-olds in a first grade, first level class, and the teacher's standing up at the front, and the kids are running crazily around the room. That's not what I mean. So that's not that kind of no control, but it's a process that you can't fully control. Learning is a neurological process that is beyond our control. It's just that simple, just that true, that God has designed us in a way that we process information individually, and you can't control exactly how that works as an instructor or as a mentor. But you are still investing in it, and that's part of the cost of mentoring, is that there's no guarantee at all about what your individual mentees will take away from it. The good news is, though, that it's predictably unpredictable, I like to say. It's unapologetically transparent. It's really quite simple, even though the complexity of learning is incredible. It's purposeful, but it's still flexible, and it's slow, but it's extremely powerful. So I find that mentoring is a great challenge for me as a thinker. As I'm very interested in this, as an instructor, as a person. I've grown to really appreciate and enjoy these aspects of mentoring, just because of the dynamics that are involved in it and what you see happen. Another way of saying all that, it's an enhanced the last point, it's an enhanced high definition channel for sharing and demonstrating that growth must come from within each of us. Now you can stop and ponder that for a minute. It's a carefully design strategy, skill sets, and conditions in which you are engaging with another individual, so that during that engagement, they discover within them something that they're learning. So it's almost counterintuitive. You say you're giving them information, that's what they're supposed to learn. That's actually indirectly true, but not directly true. Because what they're actually learning is that is that something within them is connecting with something that you're saying. And that something within them is where the actual learning comes from, not from you. So I hope that makes sense. It's a little backwards sounding, but it's so important, I think, in terms of how you engage with individuals. The more you expect people to just listen and regurgitate what you've said, the less likely it is that they will actually have learned anything. They may have gotten some information out of it, that's true, and eventually that may lead to some learning. But we can be easily, and I have fallen into this trap many, many, many times, that I think that because I made a great presentation, they probably learned a lot. And that is just baloney. That is not necessarily true. Very humbling, but very true. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with what each individual has brought to the table that moment that I'm connecting with or not. And I love to think that God superintends and oversees all of that. That in his design for us, he also comes and oversees this process that we hope to work with in individuals' development. So good training is not an accident, but it actually may look like it. I love that way of thinking about this. The childlikeness in some ways. Kelly found this picture that I've used for these courses, and I really love this picture because it's like, whoa, it just blew up. And it looked like an accident, but it was not. It was actually carefully controlled. But they are more likely to learn something from what looked like an accident than something that's very rigid and carefully controlled, like those students standing up in the classroom with the guy with the switch pointing at the board and then reciting line after line what they were supposed to say. So it is intentional, but it's flexible. It's both. It's not just one or the other. It's got to be inspirational, but it also has to be attainable. And maybe I should say aspirational, not just inspirational, but it has to be attainable. If you are working with the shrimp and the lobster story, if there is no shrimp and lobster, it doesn't matter how much you try to inspire someone to be a great seafood chef, it just isn't going to happen. So it has to be attainable, and that's part of your goal, part of your job as a mentor is to discern what is realistic here, what can we really accomplish, and then go after it, be inspirational, and recognize that that's what's going to be needed to get the students to move further along. It's got to be something the students want and something they need. And that's the tricky part, because students can oftentimes, surgeons were just notorious for coming into the operating room with me. And Scott, you may remember seeing some of them along the way. You said you'd been there when I was there, coming in along the way. And by golly, they already knew everything they needed to know. And they were out to show me that they knew everything they needed to know. So my job really was to peel that back, carefully, gracefully, and find what it is that they really could benefit from, that they would really be excited about knowing. If they just knew this one thing, that could make all the difference for them. And when you stumble on it, and I have to confess that oftentimes I felt like I was just stumbling into it. Oh, that's what it is. So, I would go into the operating room and I would watch and I would listen and I would think, what is it that I need to see here, Lord? I would be praying, show me what it is I need to see here. And then suddenly I might notice something about how they were doing something. It would be this small thing that they were doing, and I could turn that into something that they really would want. It never threatened what they already knew, never threatened what they already believed that they were good at, but found something that was unique that they could, that if they grabbed onto that one thing, it actually would change everything down the line. That's what I was always looking for, and that's a way that mentoring works. Because of the personal engagement with the student, it lets you do that. So it's got to be in the context that the student can use, is the other point that goes along with that. It is intentional, but it looks like an accident that somehow this one thing that I found, eventually leads to greater success in their surgical skills, and you may not immediately even get the connection, but it's certainly in their context. It's something that they could use immediately and then in the future, both. So as a mentor, I think it uniquely positions us to do more than just provide information. I'm sort of repeating myself here, but I just want to help you think through what I've been saying and just how critical this is. If we want to shift gears towards a learning focus, not just a teaching focus, but a learning focus, then that's going to require some skills in this art of engagement to enable you to do that. So here are the 4 things that I think are critical for that. And we talked about them a bit. This sort of unpacks that little graph or that little drawing that you saw earlier. The 4 mentoring musts: learning how to inspire, to build, transform, and then ultimately to help them sustain learning momentum. And each of those things has some specific skills that goes with it. And let me just go over this very briefly as we get close to our time to end here, because I want to hear some of your questions or any thoughts that you may have too. To be inspiring, you must know a student to really engage them. You have to share your own learning experiences to really relate, because it's about a relationship, an appropriate, with appropriateness. You're sharing things about your experiences that bind you together. That's the kind of relationship that can be really valuable in inspiring them to move forward. You're always painting a picture of something much bigger than they are, and that's what's inspirational. If it's really only about them, I hate to tell you this, or if it's really only about me, or it's really only about you, that's not terribly inspiring, quite frankly. That gets old pretty quick. But if there's a bigger picture here, something that maybe God is doing that you can paint a picture of, or that's happening in their country, or that's happening in their clinic, painting a picture of that and how they may be a part of that, that can be really inspiring. And that's where you can bring in God's story, how it intersects with their own. I believe it really fits in very nicely in that way. Building bridges to what is wanted requires of you as a mentor the skill of organizing information into themes that sort of work, not just unrelated blocks of information, but themes that paint a picture, which provides a context that you can give to the trainee before you provide the facts. So the facts fit into a picture, not just facts and then no picture. It's paint the picture, what this is about, and then how do the facts fit into that. Provide a learning environment that really promotes application. That means, how would you do this sort of questions, and why do you think this is important sort of questions, etc. Encourage discussion. That really promotes application when you do so. And ultimately, it encourages wisdom to develop, not just knowledge alone. Third, transforming thought processes. The third mentoring must. Gradually build knowledge base. That's true. You have to have information. I'm not saying that information isn't important. It is important. The problem is that by itself, it can be misdirected. It can be misinformation. By itself, it doesn't provide what they need. So gradually build a knowledge base and then correct misinformation along the way with constructive feedback. Develop habits of critical thinking with your mentees, stopping to ask how and why things work rather than just answering questions or providing answers. Develop skills in discovery and decision making by presenting challenges. Use case stories. I had one class, one of the individuals suggested this would be a great way to actually engage students is by presenting cases maybe you've struggled with. And that can be a great way to help students discover and address challenges that maybe you've experienced too. So it has two purposes: your experience, a challenge that helps critical thinking, and the engagement that then goes with it. The fourth mentoring must is sustaining momentum. So a primary benefit of mentoring, I think, is modeling lifelong learning. In other words, you've been at this a while, all of you have been, and students who see that can benefit from recognizing how it affects you, the personal well-being that it produces in you, how personal health and professional relationships are critical for maintaining momentum. We can't do it alone. I said earlier that learning always happens in the context of a community, and they need to understand that you didn't get to where you were on your own. You didn't, and they won't. And that's an incredible, important point of transformative momentum. Discover the value of a team for sustaining that growth and encourage mental, spiritual, physical, social well-being. So, as I said, not really being a life coach exactly, but recognizing that someone is hurting for personal reasons. It's very appropriate to stop and say, I recognize it looks like you're having a bad day. I'm glad to talk with you about that if you like. But in any case, I want you to know that, I'm here for you to learn in the best way possible. And we'll make every opportunity for you to resolve whatever it is that's troubling you. By the end of the course, so why join our class then? So here's to the punchline. Why join our class then? So everybody sign up. And why should you do that? Because we're going to learn these differences. You should be able to describe differences between teaching and mentoring. You probably can already do that. Identify specific actionable goals for personal growth. Apply state-of-the-art learning principles to mentoring strategies for yourself. And apply holistic values to training opportunities that encourages not just learning, but spiritual growth. And I think most of you, maybe all of you, see and believe the importance not just of students getting smarter, but of developing a healthy relationship with others and with God. And that's so important. And the other reason, the last is because, why join our class? Because you can learn to be a model of mentoring skills and values to others. So the class topics include the role of the mentor. We've talked a little bit about that. Strategies. What are some specific strategies to optimize learning? How do you go beyond medical capacity building to spiritual capacity building and marry those two? It's not just one or the other. You don't on the weekends do a Bible study and then during the week you just do skills, as if they're two separate things. You actually marry those two. How do you do that? It's including both of those things. How do you cultivate a personalized mentoring process that works for you? I at the end of the last class, I actually gave them, here's my mentoring strategy. And I said, now you need to forget this because this will not work for you. So very, very discouraged for them to hear that. I guess they thought they were hoping I had the answer to the problem. It is not the answer to the problem. You have to develop your own. That takes work. It means that you have to have a personal level of interest and commitment to mentoring in which you will want to cultivate your own process that works for you, and you can see God use that. So the role of a mentor is not taking a job as an instructor. It's stepping into a role in a relationship. Think of it that way. It's defined by skills and knowledge and attitudes. The strategies we'll talk about are strategies that you learn to teach in a way that people actually learn and become the memorable teacher, creating good conditions for learning and learning to create goals that are actionable, not just, wouldn't it be great if, but actually actionable goals. Mentoring tools for feedback, such as reframing, redefining, reflective, we go over all these, I won't go over them now, and addressing less than optimal conditions that our students face. And then beyond learning to spiritual capacity building, we'll discuss sustainable training, that sustainable training requires integration with values, the why question, and how to use restorative and creative values as a tool for problem solving, making connections with the life of Jesus, who provides such a great illustration, as I think most all of you know, and the power of this new creative process that he himself launched. And we raise awareness of our students for this process going on, which creates this picture of hope and how they can participate in that in their own context, which I think is so valuable. We cultivate a personalized mentoring process for yourself because we're all different and because we each have different strengths and experiences and really can't use anyone else's strategy. So this is what we wind up with, and it's your personal Heart for Healthcare model, which will be your plan for transformative engagement that you can then expand and practice over the years to come, I hope, in helping you to inspire, build, and transform people. Always remember in this, mentoring requires a good grip on God's grace. Mentoring is messy and it's unpredictable, but I would encourage you with the strongest words possible. The unexpected can produce results far beyond what we can ever ask or think. That ought to remind those of you who know some of the Bible, might even remind you of a little verse that's in Ephesians. You know, that our God can provide far beyond what we can ask or think. That's what happens when you leave this process and humbly approach it as a mentor. It can produce results far beyond what you can ask or think. Just a couple final thoughts. Be prepared to learn. Your students have a lot to teach. Provide the best tools that you can always, and the best environments for your students. Remember that thinking is the key, not memorizing, and that spiritual capacity building is just as important as medical capacity building. I like to think it's important to remember that the importance of being human. I'm actually writing a book called The Importance of Being Human. So there you go. Spilled the beans on it. But I think it's critical to remember that just human being, the human design, our image of Godness, we're image bearers, and there's something that God didn't do that by mistake. It's terribly important that we recognize and appreciate that. So I'd invite you to our course to sharpen your skills, to start to see, the process of mentoring as a transformative process.